Cool. Thanks for the introduction. So yeah, as Jessica mentioned, my name's Anisha, and I've been a consultant at IBM for about the last 3.5 years. And what I want to share today is a journey that I went through last year due to COVID-19. And it is about how we went from zero to production in 60 days. So it might sound like the title of a horror movie, but this was the ask. What happened was, obviously due to COVID-19, students from the University of Arts London were left without their in-person showcase. Now, this showcase is where these art students display their work for the world to see, and a lot of them get recruited off this. And if you've heard of Grayson Perry, that's where he was discovered. And now he's the Chancellor of the UAL. So what they wanted was a platform for students to upload their work in various formats. So to be able to upload it in sound, PDFs, images, 3D, and for this work to then be moderated. So tutors could go in and see the work and moderate it, award prizes, and then for it to be displayed to the whole world in a showcase that was meant to go live 2 weeks from the day we started coding. And if that wasn't enough, this was all meant to be mobile friendly, accessible. And so what this did was trigger what I like to call production phobia for me. And this was the fear of messing up the production environment. And rightfully so, because we only had 4 sprints and about 3 developers to do this. But we managed to do it. And I'll show you the site before I take you through the stack that we used to be able to achieve it. So if you head over to graduateshowcase.arts.ac.uk, you'll be taken to this lovely homepage. You can go in, you can see different works. So we managed to collate collections. So different schools and different colleges could collate a collection. So for example, the London School of Fashion collated this one. There was a little message from Grayson Perry, and then you could go in and see all the students' work. So we had a nice page, and this displayed all the projects, and every time you land on this page, this was all randomized. So if I search for something like COVID, it searches through all the projects and returns all the COVID related projects, highlights the where in the project it was COVID. They're all tagged as well. So say this project didn't have COVID in the title, it might have been tagged with COVID or in their description. So it searched all the fields to show anything related. So it was a really powerful search. And then this was all provided by Strappy, which I'll get onto in a few minutes. So this is one of the projects examples. If we go in here, you can see the different work of art. You can go through their different project pages. Looks like they've got the same picture. First render is slightly slower because we were using CloudFront to provide our images. So AWS's service CloudFront, which caches the images after the first render. But once you start going through them and after they'd rendered once, if you reload this page, those images would render a lot faster. And as I said, it was all mobile friendly. So if we go in here and you can see that it's all mobile friendly, and if I rotate the device, it will come up with a pop-up saying, can you rotate it back to portrait so that you have a better viewing experience, because we didn't get around to really getting everything working in this landscape mode. So if I close that again. And what was really cool was the way we managed to give each college its own page. So if you go up to the top nav bar, where you can see that each college has its own course, and each college has its own subject area, and each subject area has its own course. So to get all these college pages working was going to be a nightmare if we had to do it through the natural React routing. But what we used was this mechanism from Strappy that was really useful, called the slug mechanism, which allowed these different colleges to build out their own specific pages. And that brings me into Strappy. So Strappy is the CMS that we used. And what it is a really lightweight open source CMS, where this is the interface you're given. And in this interface, you can say whether or not you want a collection. So you can have different collections, and within those collections, you can have different item types. So you could see you've got an ID, you've got where it's created. You've got different single types. So single types are options. So if you wanted to have something that was reusable in your different collection types, you could define a single type. And what was really cool about Strappy was, sorry, back to my slides. What was really cool about Strappy was the GraphQL interface that it exposed. So if you've heard of GraphQL, it's a query language for APIs, and it provides a really complete and understandable description of the data in your API. So what it really does is give you the power to ask for exactly what you want and nothing more. And this makes it really easy to evolve your APIs over time. And for us, where our data that was being pulled through from the UAL systems where the students would upload their work was constantly changing, having a GraphQL endpoint was really nice because we could define our schemas. And I'll show you how easy it was to query that data from a GraphQL endpoint. So if I come in here and I say I want to query a category, it'll auto-populate that for me. And then I can go in and say I want the query for ID, let's say 1, and the field that I want back from that is the name. And so it tells me that name will be a string. And so if we do that, we will see it get back the category French. And if we go into Strappy, you can see in the categories for category section, we have number 1 being French. And so what this allowed us to do is really have a nice React front end with an Apollo client querying the Strappy exposed GraphQL endpoint. So we had really nice schemas for the different data, and if anything changed, say when integrating with the UAL system where the student was uploading their work and the field changed from first name to say last name, or they removed the first from the name, we would be able to pick that up straight away from our schema. And what was really cool about Strappy was a content type. So if you go into Content Builder, you can build out content which has this really nice UID field where you can have a slug or a SEO URL. And this slug-based system is let us really dynamic pages without having to go in and define them all ourselves. So we had slugs for each of the different subject areas, and then obviously for the courses. So if you look at this URL, that shows you the slug-based system that we use with Strappy. Another ask that they had, if I can go into that, was having each of these college pages have this area on their page where they could dynamically input the HTML that they wanted. So obviously we didn't want to have to go in and build like 150 college pages. So what we did was we used the power of Storybook. So Storybook allows you to visualize your components. And if we go into this one, you might be able to guess which company Storybook this is for. It's probably something none of us have used this year, or if you did, you were very lucky. And it's for Airbnb, and you can see the different components exposed. And there's another example for this one. Again, this company we won't have used this year, so it's for Skyscanner. And what you can see is a really nice knobs, and you can add different knobs, but you can also interact with your components as you would on your normal site. It gives you different versions of things you can plug in, so you can run your accessibility tests on Storybook. So it's really good for regression testing. You can have your different actions, and you can interact with all your components. And what we did was we built a Storybook for all our React components. And what we had was a knob here for, not knob, sorry, an option here for a HTML that came out of the React component. And we had a CSS style sheet within our application that defined all the classes. So when we were building out components, we defined class names so that the HTML that they exposed could be put into a little HTML tag in the React component. And that way, the colleges and course pages should just go in and be able to create the HTML content for whatever they wanted. So they could have used our buttons, they could have used videos or anything they really wanted. And that's how they could create this custom part of their page. So that really gave us the power to give them the capacity to build out what they wanted without it really affecting our development in our application. That was so that was kind of whirlwind on how we built this, and you know, it really couldn't have been done without Strappy. And that kind of brings me on to the open source and the value of having open source software that lets people like the UAL build out things really fast and without having to spend hundreds and thousands of pounds on managed systems. So what I really wanted to touch on was the lessons that I learned. So this was indeed my first project as technical lead, and there's a few things that I sort of gathered which I wanted to note down and sort of share. In maybe the things you already know, or maybe they're just things that I thought might be useful. So testing was the main one. So having tests helps you really pick up anything that might be going on and helps you with your debugging. But making sure that you've got the right test is really important. So obviously most clients would come in and say we'd love 100% test coverage, but given the time frame we had, this was not really an option. So making sure that we had the right tests, so integration tests, so with strappy, and having really good UI tests to go through the user flow, which was what we wanted to really test in the first place, right? That if we're making changes that were constantly happening, will this affect what's already existing? And this is really important for us because we had a launch to the students, obviously, so the first launch for them to be able to go in and view their work, and then the second launch where it went public. And in between all that, there was also a private launch. So obviously making sure that nothing we didn't expect to change between that was important. Second one is more of a personal one. So it's trusting your team. And I find that in this situation where we're all working from home and you may not have even met some members of your team, putting the trust in them and giving them ownership of the environment is just as important as any of the other technical lessons learned. So third one is agile. And now, while this might not seem intuitive, being a project with a fixed deadline, making sure that your project's agile will actually really benefit. So in our case, we had different features being built out, and what we did was build the minimum viable iteration of the phase of what the client wanted. So for example, if we go into the viewer work page, so this project's listing page, what this was the first iteration, just getting all the projects to show up and being able to search for them with 2 words. What we ideally wanted to get to was having a filter, having different ways of searching, but obviously like time constraints didn't allow it. But having done things agile, we ended up with a working site where we actually had time to bug fix as well, and not be building out features right to the very end that probably didn't even work. The fourth one is PDFs are a nightmare. So this was a personal bane of my 4 weeks, and it was just getting those PDFs to work. So if anybody has any suggestions on how to get PDFs to work with React better, I'm all ears. The fifth one was documenting data models and API responses. If you're not using GraphQL, which sort of takes out this and abstracts it for you, having this really well documented so your whole team is aware of what's going on and what to expect, is really useful when things are really changing quite fast. And I think having that really sped up our delivery. DevOps from day one. So while this might be pushed back against, I think having DevOps happening at the same time as development is really key so that you're not sitting there with code that's not being displayed anywhere. And that brings me on to staging environment is also a must. And while you might think that this is probably an obvious one, you'd be surprised at how many clients don't want to pay for staging environments. So if ever this happens, I'd say push back as much as you can. Make sure that you have a staging environment, and are not debugging in production. And the final one is that designers and developers are working hand in hand, and make sure that you're having open conversations with your designers along the whole journey so that you don't end up developing things that could have been designed slightly easier, but also they know the value of their own designs, and making sure that you appreciate that some things obviously might seem like not as important probably are, and vice versa. So yeah, that's about 6 minutes. No, not 6 minutes, 15 minutes on how we did something in 60 days. So thank you.